Hey YouTube, can we talk a minute? Or several minutes, as the case may be, because I tend to ramble and get long-winded. Alright. I want to talk about something having to do with the fantasy genre, or the science fiction genre, or even fiction in general. A lot of people think that all fantasy is the same. And that's just not true. It's really not. Anyone who thinks that hasn't read any fantasy lately. They think it's all derivative of Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons, and it's all, halflings and elves marching through the forest killing orcs and goblins. And yeah, a lot of it is that. That's not what it is. That's not what fantasy is. Fantasy is so much deeper than that. And so much more expressive than that, and it's not formulaic anymore. There's so many ways to tell an adventuring story. So many. Dwarves don't have to be 3 feet tall. They don't have to live underground. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but they don't have to. Dragons don't have to be burninating the peasants all the time. They can be friendly. They can be allies. Elves don't have to be the wisest and fairest of all races. They don't have to be graceful. They can be awkward and klutzy and trip over their own feet and drop that priceless orb as they're trying to set it on the pedestal and win the whole thing. Like, it happens. Everybody gets a bad roll now and then. But people think that Tolkien fantasy is how all fantasy is, and it's just not true. My book, my dwarves are not 3 feet tall. They're average 5 foot, a little more, a little shorter than, say, humans, but they're not the stereotypical dwarves. Elves don't live forever. They're not unrealistically beautiful. They're not even considered wise. They're basically just normal people. And humans? Hey, guess what? Normal people. Minotaurs? Normal people. Really, really big, really strong, please don't piss them off normal people, but still normal people. Dragons are friendly. No, maybe not friendly. They can be convinced. And magic is not this inaccessible thing that you have to study for hundreds or thousands of years to get right. It's something that basically anybody with a willingness to learn can pick up. Not many people have yet, but it's possible. And it's not wands and staffs and you have to go to school. No, it's if you can picture something and determine the correct amount of magic power in order to do it, you can do it. But that's assuming you know how, and you have the judgment to be able to do it. Not everyone is automatically a great fighter. You get into Lord of the Rings, and pretty much every character you meet outside of the hobbits is some ridiculously awesome mystical warrior. Nah, it's not like that. My main character had to learn what to do with a sword, and she got her butt kicked a few times before she managed to hold her own. Lots of practice, lots of training, lots of bruises, so many bruises. Great. The wizard character doesn't have to have all of the answers. If you even have a wizard character, I do, but that's just me. Gandalf doesn't have to know everything. He doesn't. You don't even have to have your fantasy story set in a medieval setting. You can have fantasy elements without being medieval Europe. You can have fantasy elements in modern day Melbourne. You can have fantasy elements in Berlin. You can have fantasy elements wherever you want fantasy elements. And that's cool. The more diverse it can get, the better. My current project, yeah, it's traditional fantasy. It's a medieval fantasy, and that's fine. I love that style of story. I really do. And that is what I love, and that is what I decided to write. That doesn't mean it's bad. That doesn't mean you have to like it. That doesn't mean anybody has to like it. If I like it, that's good enough for me. But when I finish this project, I have another one on the plate. And it's more of a historical fantasy. It's based around real people, real events, in the 1930s, 40s. And that's cool. It's still a fantasy. But I'll be damned if I'm not going to get the true life historical details right. Yeah, stay tuned for that. That's going to be fun. No idea when it's happening, but it's going to be fun. I'm super excited. I have a sci-fi project in my head that I want to do, and that's not something that has to be formulaic. It doesn't have to be spaceships and lasers and Star Trek and Star Wars and lightsabers and evil empire. It doesn't have to be that. It really doesn't. Perfect example. Go look at Treasure Planet right now. Oh, wait. Did you watch it? Good. All right. Treasure Planet is not traditional sci-fi, but it's sci-fi. It is a retelling of Treasure Island with a twist, a futuristic technological twist. And that's all it is. But it's so good and so underrated, but so good. It's not traditional sci-fi. Not even close. But it doesn't have to be. Nothing has to be traditional sci-fi. Now, if you stop and look at Discworld, that most people would consider that a fantasy rather than science fiction. I think it falls squarely between the two. But again, that's my opinion, and fits neither of those categories perfectly. You go back and look at Asimov's Foundation trilogy, that is firmly sci-fi. That is hard sci-fi. Most of Asimov's stuff is. Go look at Orson Scott Card. Ender's Game. Sci-fi, right? Is it though? I don't know, you tell me. Yeah, there's like kids in space and whatever. But it could go either way. It really doesn't matter. There are no hard lines. There are no hard lines. Everything is subjective. Something that might be marketed as sci-fi could be more of a fantasy. Something that's marketed as fantasy could be more of sci-fi. Something that's marketed as historical fiction could be more historical fantasy. Something marketed as historical fiction could just be fiction. There's no hard lines. It's all marketing BS. So, I read a ton of fantasy. You look at my Kindle and you'd think I didn't read anything else. But I also have contemporary fiction, I have thrillers, I have adventure stories, I have lots of different things because they blur the lines. And I'm not afraid to do that either. Which is why I have more than one project lined up. I am not writing in Qetra forever. I'm not doing it. And that's okay. Authors don't need to stay in a box. You can write whatever you want to write. If you want to write a high fantasy sword and sorcery knights and maidens story now, your next book could be a serial killer thriller set in, I don't know, freaking Nebraska. It doesn't matter. You don't have to stay in a box. I'm not gonna. I'm gonna finish this project and move on to something else. It's okay.